Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Kendall Bauer, and today's presentation is What Do Animals Do in the Monsoon? Presented by our esteemed expedition leader, Conan Dumenil. Conan, it is a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Hey, thank you, Kendall. The pleasure is likewise. Hello, folks, and thank you for joining us again today. Today I'm going to talk to you a bit of the monsoon. Now, this is part two of a two-part series that I've done on the monsoon. And I will admit, and as I was telling Kendall earlier before you logged in, this is actually inspired by some of the questions that we get from our guests who travel often to India, or at least anywhere in the subcontinent, is, what happens during the monsoon? We hear this, we haven't experienced it for ourselves, and that kind of got me thinking on, let's do a series on, on the monsoon and what happens, how it changes landscapes, how it transforms lives of the people that live here, and what effect that it have on animals. Now, the monsoon period is a kind of our downtime in India, and whereas during the season I spend my time guiding trips across India, Nepal, Bhutan. The monsoon is the time where most of the parks, most of the reserves in these countries are shut, and it's shut for fair reason, because there's just insane amounts of rain that happens in some places. So all our wet season is really congested into the 3 months. We are now in August, and that's pretty much in the thick of things. And as I say this, it's coming down to rain outside. I mean, right on cue. So yeah, we are in the middle of the monsoon, but it's not a time of just dampness and sort of dampness around the ears and foggy brains. It's a lovely time, and for me personally, I really enjoy this time of the year. Not only does it give you a breather from some of the trips that we run professionally, it's time to go out and explore by myself or with my family. And so we just sort of come back from a little family holiday, and I must say I've kind of arm twisted my family into sort of following me out in the rains and looking for the little creepy crawlies that come out during the season. So yeah, I'm a bit of a rain nerd. I like enjoying sitting quietly and enjoying the rain. And I'm sure much of you, this is a perfect time to sit and sip on that hot sort of cuppa of your favorite beverage. But it brings us to a sort of all-important question, which I'd like to answer in many ways today, is what happens, and more specifically, what do animals do during this period of time? Are they on holiday too? Do they take a break? What happens? So to understand this first, I'm going to sort of backstep a few paces. And if you have joined me on my previous webinar a couple of weeks ago, this is kind of going to be a recap of what we covered in that webinar. But it's also just to set the stage, to give you a setting of everything that goes on in the subcontinent during that period of time. So I like to take you to this particular setting, lay it out in front of you. It is midsummer for us. Summer is the month of May. So mid-May, the Indian subcontinent, the mass of land is heating up because the sun is directly above the Tropic of Cancer at that point of time. And the Tropic of Cancer runs almost through the center of India. So we're beating down sun. Temperatures sort of in the heartland of the country can rise to about 117, 115 easily on any given day during peak of summer. So it is baking hot, right? Not much work goes on. Even people working out in the landscape, especially farmers and people in rural parts, often have very shorter working hours, big siesta in the afternoon, seeking the shade during the day. But most of the ground is, it's bone dry, it's parched, and so you would think, most of the landscape must look dry and arid because it's clear skies, not a cloud in sight. The grass is dried up. Most of the leaves of the trees have fallen for some species. So a lot of the landscape actually looks like this. And one would think most of the landmass would actually look like this, but it is not so. the subcontinent has many diverse sort of biogeographical regions, beg your pardon, from the snow-clad Himalayas to high altitude montane forests in the south of India. We've got the desert, we've got cloud forests and rainforests, we've got tall deciduous forests, mangroves, coasts, big river valleys, and so on. So there is a myriad of landscape, a beautiful mosaic of diverse habitats. And all of this is possible because of certain weather patterns and, of course, the geographical features that kind of determine whether or influence these weather patterns that happen. So let's give you a lay of the land first in the subcontinent. And when I say subcontinent, I'm looking at it from a perspective of the trips we run for NatHab, which is in the countries of India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, which, combined with some other countries, constitute the subcontinent of India. So I will use this term interchangeably to give you an understanding of what goes on in this little, actually not so little region of the world. So we've got a few geographical features that influence weather and climatic patterns across the landscape, starting with the Himalayas, the most imposing, the tallest mountains in the world, and probably the most imposing feature in this landscape. And that plays a very vital role in determining the pattern of rainfall across this land, because it actually stops the clouds from passing over into Central Asia, making India this lush tropical paradise. And the same can be said for the central highlands that exist in Sri Lanka, the little pearl-shaped or teardrop-shaped island at the bottom. So you've got these relief structures at the center of the landmass that stop the rain clouds from coming in and progressing further inland, therefore making these little niches or beautiful little microhabitats in these areas which are rich in diversity and rainfall. Similar to the Himalayas, we also have the Deccan Plateau that is across central India. We have the Western Ghats, which is another continuous mountain chain that runs in the southern part of India, not as tall as the Himalayas. They only grow to get to about 6,000, 6,500 feet. And then you also have similar size hills in the eastern part that play a very important function in the weather conditions of Myanmar and Bangladesh as well, the eastern hills, and then of course the large deltas and the desert and so on. So that's just giving you the lay of the land, and it's important to understand these geographical features because the monsoon, the winds could just sweep across the landscape, but if it wasn't for some of these features, you won't have that diversity in the land, in some of the habitats that we're talking about. So what is the monsoon, you may ask? So the monsoon is basically, it's not confined again to the subcontinent. It's something that sweeps across the world. It's known by various terms in different places. But if you're looking at the region around the Indian Ocean, the monsoon is a seasonal change in the strongest prevailing winds that we have here. And the biggest determining winds are the westerlies, which is kind of a trade wind. We also have the northern trade winds, which come in from China, from sort of the northeastern direction, and they sort of converge at or near the equator in this sort of convergence in this little stream that shifts its position depending on the tilt of the Earth's axis. So in the northern hemisphere, it is more during summer, and in the southern hemisphere, it is during winter because of the way the Earth moves and tilted. So these trade winds converge, they bring in warm moisture from the ocean, and which results in giving us two kind of monsoon seasons. The first summer monsoon, which is between June to September, the beginning of June to kind of mid-September, and then we have a break for about a few weeks, and then we have the winter monsoon, which happens in October to April. Now this is these two monsoons are now again just very particular to the subcontinent. So what happens during this time? We said the landmass gets heated up to really high temperatures, and what that creates a low pressure center on the landmass. And then because of the differential in cooling between land and water, the water doesn't get heated as much, and so what that creates is a high pressure in a cooler ocean, and that sends in the moisture-laden winds into the land, that literally sucking in these moisture-laden winds from the ocean, sucking it into land, which then converges on rainfall. Now, this progresses through the months. The monsoon in the subcontinent starts on the southwest coast of India, following northwards, and then Sri Lanka gets a bit of rain, and then it progresses northerly in the northerly direction to Nepal and Bhutan and all the foothills of the Himalayas, where by around this time of the year, it's raining cats and dogs there. So if you look at the heat map on your left, you can see the areas of high heat. And if you sort of compare it to the progression of the monsoon, you see the monsoon also travels in the same direction. So starts off in the southwest and then progresses up north. Now, again, just to nerd out a little bit on why this happens. Now, I was talking to you about the tilt of the Earth's axis, and being within the tropical region. Of course, we are blessed with a lot of sunlight, but because of that slight tilt in the axis, the winds also change between seasons. So now we know summer solstice, the Earth is at its right over the Tropic of Cancer, and as it moves to the winter solstice, it moves. Well, the sun doesn't move, but the Earth moves, and then the sun's position then starts focusing on the southern hemisphere, which gets its summer during December. So between this time, so between that the sun, well, between the two tropics, there is a variation in the heat. And that also what that does is that affects the pressure and affects the wind patterns that move, which is why you see the sudden shift in winds and the sudden change between the pressure centers. So in the summer monsoon, you have the high pressure on the landmass, that is the Indian subcontinent and the Tibetan plateau, which draws in the moisture-laden winds. And in the winter monsoon, you have the pressure centers moving to the Indian Ocean, which gets hotter, which then brings back the monsoons across the subcontinent. So what we call in the subcontinent, we call it the retreating monsoon, also known as the winter monsoon. And these are today's satellite images, just to give you today's forecast. As you can see, the monsoons are sweeping across India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, parts of Sri Lanka, Nepal and Bhutan are covered as well. But you can see this big sort of cloudy area in the Indian Ocean, and it goes all the way into Southeast Asia, across Indonesia, and even to the northern parts of Australia as well. So the Indian Ocean, and into the Western Pacific is where right now we are experiencing a lot of rainfall. And this rainfall is so important because it does transform our landscape. This is a picture of Ranthambore, one of the drier regions, just before the rains, and the same shot, the same landscape after it receives its first rain. So it is such an important factor in transforming the landscapes and habitats, and how it affects us. And in my previous webinar, I spoke about how it affects and what the cultural significance on humanity is with the monsoons. And today, in fact, this was a question that was asked in the last webinar as well. So, we spoke about landscapes and cultures. What happens to the animals? What do they do during the rain? And I think this is a question that I shall try and answer today. So various animals, various individuals in species all have different reactions to the monsoon. And my time guiding here, close to 20 years now, I've had the privilege of going out to various wild spaces and spending enough time. And I've always noticed that, the first rains, every single species seem to enjoy it. They don't seem bothered. And, coming out of a long, hot summer, the rains are such a welcome sort of respite to the heat. And, everyone seems to sort of enjoy it. But then as we progress in the monsoons, we see a lot of species, different species using different strategies to deal with the rains. Some of them take shelter, some of them use it to the best of their advantage. So what happens to some of these species? Well, certain species like, the crocodiles and other reptiles have watertight skin, and they're pretty good at dealing with inclement weather. They remain calm and cool and kind of never freak out even during the hardest rains or the harshest thunderstorms. But not the same can be said for a lot of animals. Furry animals such as mammals, such as giant pandas, tigers, brown bears, kangaroos, and have all sort of evolved the ability to sort of shake themselves dry in mere seconds. And in fact, I was reading up on this study performed by the Georgia Institute of Technology, and so they have determined that the shaking is actually tuned in for certain species to to the perfect frequency that some of them actually use to shake themselves dry, and it all depended on the size of the animal and the anatomy. But sort of the loose skin tissue, turns out to be playing a very important role. So simply by just whipping around the body, it increases the speed of the drops leaving the animal, and sort of ensuring relative kind of dryness to the tight dermal tissue. So a lot of these mammals have that sort of kind of resistant membrane to water, but having that loose skin really helps it dry, which I think sort of this study and now I think it solves a very important question. Question that humans have been asking themselves for millennia, is that why everything else around a dog during a shakedown usually gets wet and the dog ends up bone dry by the end of it. So yeah, so it all has to do with anatomy and a kind of adaptation to the rains. But we see other animals also using different methods. And for our first sort of feature character, I like to travel to the cloud forest of Borneo, a world away from where you are right now, and a place that's experiencing the monsoons right now. And so Borneo is the land of the cloud forest, where dampness and humidity is part of the landscape. Even when it's not monsoon season, it is wet. And in the monsoon season, it is really wet. So, and here we have this unique character, or this very interesting character that has developed a way to deal with the rain. And I think outside of humans, orangutans have come up with some of the primate world's sort of best ways of dealing with the rain, as rain is part of their landscape. Orangutans are the most arboreal of great apes. They spend most of the time up in trees. They have proportionately long arms, which help them sort of swing through or brachiate through their branches. And they are quite heavy animals. The males can weigh about 160 odd pounds, and the females can reach to about 80 odd pounds. And one would think a large animal and how they sort of maneuver through the branches. But they are animals that very rarely come down from the canopy, which means up there at the canopy, most often they are exposed to the elements. And being one of the most intelligent of primates, I think humans included here, they are known to use sophisticated tools, and they also construct very elaborate shelters during the rain to take refuge. So they build their nests up on trees. But apart from that, they've also been, studies have shown, observations have shown that they use a variety of tools, such as large leaves and so on, to take shelter from the rain. And so it's no mystery that they have figured out how to use umbrellas. But I just wonder here, maybe was it them that discovered this first or us? But it's it's such a natural. Studies have shown that it's such a natural sort of behavior that you find in the heaviest rain a lot. And now and some chimpanzees have shown this too. You see a orangutan up there with big leaf or hiding under a refuge, using it as an umbrella. But it's not just these adaptations. The wet season or the rainy season in a lot of places are a time for plenty, and many species capitalize on this time of plenty, sort of making hay, like I say, when it rains. And an observation that was shared, and some of you might have observed this yourself, and this was actually by a fellow colleague and a good friend of mine, Payal, who's also a fellow EL with us. She had observed this beautiful phenomenon, and this picture goes, the following pictures are credited to her. At the onsets of the rains, when the humidity goes up, when the temperature dips and the humidity goes up, we see a big phenomenon here happening of the termites swarming and leaving their nests. Now, this is a very important time of the year in their life cycle. We know termites form giant sort of cathedral-shaped pinnacles to more mound-like structures or just climbing up trees, but all of them go through this phase where the sexually mature individuals will leave, apart from the queen. A lot of them will leave the nest to go out and start colonies on their own. And usually the time of them swarming, as this is called, or them leaving the nest, the alates, as they call the mature individuals who leave the nest, will usually time it at the onset of rain. Now, a lot of studies are going on to figure out why they do it, but they know one of the triggers is the change in humidity. It probably makes it a little easier to dig themselves out of their burrows. Or it's also just a time where there is also a lot more availability of everything else. So it's also easier to make new burrows with the soft earth around them. And so they ascend into the sky, and this beautiful picture with lovely backlit of a little bit of the dust and just the sort of diffusion in the air, catching the sunlight, and these beautiful winged termites just take to the skies and find their new places. And a lot of them will shed their wings almost immediately, as if the wings are just for this particular purpose alone. And then they go and they start their colonies elsewhere. Of course, this is a time where many predators also capitalize on this sudden abundance of insects. And it's not just termites. A lot of insects emerge. You see beetles, bugs, leaf hoppers, everything. There's a sudden peak of activity that happens at the onset of the monsoons. And of course, a lot of predators also make hay and use this time to kind of stock up on this sort of nutrition-rich diet that is, well, it's basically a smorgasbord, a free-for-all buffet, so to speak, that's available in plenty. So you'll see birds descending, you'll see geckos swarming around termite hills, you'll see snakes catching insects as well. And after these insects, you have reptiles and smaller reptiles and amphibians, and behind them also come the larger predators as well. And this is a picture from last monsoon on my last family vacation that we went out. Was a vine snake that was feeding off a gliding frog. Incidentally, the frog, I'm just going to pause and sidestep with the story here. So the gliding frog is again an arboreal species. It's a frog that makes its nests just over little pools of water that usually are formed at the first sight of rain. And they build this sort of a little foam nest between two cups of leaves. And they time their egg laying and the mating and the egg laying so that when the rains come, it washes down the foam where these froglets, where the tadpoles have hatched in the nest, and they fall into this little pool of water for safety. So while as the nest stayed nice and safe, unfortunately, the mother didn't, and she was an easy target. After the entire nest building and laying of the eggs, she was exhausted and became an easy target for the snake. But well, that is the circle of life, and that's how things work in the wild. But apart from this, for a time for high predation and making the most of this time of plenty, where a lot of animals just go up and feast. It's also a time where many animals also court and mate. And one of the first heralds of the monsoon that happens, especially in India, is the Jacobin cuckoo. Now, this species is native to, it's a partial migrant to India and native to parts of India and Southern Africa. And there's so much folklore around this bird in both continents. And in India, ballads have been written, poems have been written about this bird. Because what happens is at the start of the monsoon, it starts its whole courtship. And they have this beautiful courtship display that culminates in the pairing up of a male and female. But prior to the display, often you'd find the males coming up onto a vantage point and calling out into the sky. And they have this, sort of clematis, really loud raucous call, which, why their scientific name is also Clematis jacobinus. So they have this really loud call, which, calling out to signal its territory and for a potential mate. Now, a lot of folklore is written saying that this bird thirsts after the rain, and it opens its beak up to the sky and to quench its thirst from the first drops of rain. Now, whether it was an observed behavior or not, we don't know, but folklore says it. But science has observed this species of birds actually drinking water off fallen leaves, or little dew drips that happen off the leaves, and also directly soaking in. So folklore had it constructed this as a bird with the beak at the top of its head, but it was probably a bird that was facing towards the sky with its mouth open, waiting for the rain. But apart from just this courtship and signs of plenty, I think one of the prime examples of multitude or abundance of species or coming out during the rain is best seen in Africa. And this is probably a scene that is very, very familiar to a lot of you. If you have traveled to Eastern or Southern Africa, we know the migration patterns follow the water sources, and we know the water sources are related to the amount of rainfall. Now, this is an image from the Serengeti of a small herd of wildebeest just standing there in the rain, soaking it up, just living it out there. So the monsoon in the Serengeti, the rainy season, is slightly different from the monsoon that we have here. Here, the wet season is from November all the way up to March or April, and that's the time also where we see a lot of these ungulates, especially the topi and warthogs and the like, which go into their breeding, which will go into their birthing season at this point. So they will bring out, they will give birth. A lot of the ungulates will give birth at this time, just after the rains, and that is only because with the arrival of the rains, it brings about fresh growth in grass, and all the ungulates that feed on the fresh grass, the short grass, are the ungulates that you see giving birth during this time. And it's the same with most parts of the world. In India, we have the hog deer that like the short grass, the spotted deer, axis deer as well. You see them feeding off the short grass. And sometimes, if we've had good monsoons or a good wet season, you'll often see them having 2 birthing cycles during the year, and most of it, and all of this is due to the factor that the availability or the abundance of food therefore translates into the abundance of ungulates or abundant of prey species, which then has an effect on the other species dependent on that ecosystem. So a simple weather phenomenon can trigger off a natural cycle or a life cycle within other species as well, which is why it's so important that we study this more and we realize how important these cycles are to other species as well. Apart from birthing, it's also a time of breeding as well. We see many animals going into this, and what I'm going to show you next is a series of beautiful photographs taken by this Italian photographer of this pair of mating lions in the Ngorongoro crater in Africa, and they don't seem phased by the rain at all. It was a pair that had been following each other, and a lot of, like I said, with a lot of predators, especially apex predators, we've seen their cycles, their breeding cycles are actually timed in times of plenty. So because of the feast of ungulates that's available and ready there, so they time their breeding cycles so that the young ones are also born. I mean, it's a series starting from the top left. You see, just absolutely at ease in the rain. This pair, I think he followed them for a few hours. And as you know, with lions, they can breed for several days. I mean, the courtship can last several days and multiple times of mating during that period. And well, at least for one of them, it seemed to be a good affair, judging from those pictures. But apart from just breeding and birthing, there's also other cycles. We have the emergence of cicadas, and this again is in the wet forest of the Himalayas as well. In the Himalayan foothills, you see them come out, and during many parts of the year, the forests are silent or devoid of cicada calls, but after the first rains, the noise level in the forest just shoots up to that level, because when the cicadas emerge, so they go through a metamorphosis, and you can see on the leaf here, you see the nymph stage, which is kind of the wingless one, which is left its shell back here. That's the bottom half of your of this image here. And the cicada, the adult cicada, emerges with its sort of a transparent, beautiful veined wings. It emerges from the shell of its nymph into an adult phase. And the adults, they have just two things on their mind. A is to feed, get nourishment, and B is to breed. So as part of their breeding, they also make these sounds, which sounds like sort of a large hissing through the forest, and you'll often hear them on tree canopies throughout. Beautiful, beautiful call. If you're familiar with cicadas in Northern America as well, you know they have these timed cycles. You've probably seen them, but it's such a fantastic event to imagine that through entire the larval stage they spend underground, feeding on sort of sap, root sap, and biotic factors in the soil, and then they only emerge out and come out of the soil as adults, cling on to the bark of a leaf, bark of a tree or a leaf, emerge out of the shell, and then fly away as adults, and then come back and repeat this entire cycle again. It's a beautiful. I think one of the most fascinating events that happen in the natural world. We also, apart from this, we also will look at some species, and one species in particular that doesn't really seem to be phased by the rains. This is the purple-faced leaf monkey. They inhabit the tiny island of Sri Lanka, and even in that small island, there are about 4 subspecies of them, and they have a range in their coats, but named after sort of the purplish hue on their face. The individual you see on the left of your screen is the one that inhabits the wet zone. Now, the wet zone of Sri Lanka is an area that historically had a lot of tall trees. Now, these are also animals that love to live up in the canopy, though not as canopy specific like the cousins, the orangutans in Indonesia. But they do occasionally come down to the ground, but most of the life is up. They're arboreal. They're up in the trees, they eat fruits, and they eat the leaves as well. And they don't seem to be bothered by rain in their region they live in, and sometimes it can be even deluges as well. But what they do need is they need these large canopies, and they need these connected canopies so they can go from one to the other as part of the daily movement, which is why it's also important to understand the habitat they live in and why these climatic factors can affect the habitat. They used to be leaf monkeys. There still are small pockets all the way up to the capital city of Colombo. And due to the vast urbanization, part of these forest tracts have been lost, which has now resulted in the decline of the species in some of the areas as well. For our next individual, I want to move closer back home. Now, while this is not directly related to the monsoon, but it is. I want to talk about a particular species where sort of wetness and water is a part of, is such an integral part of their life. And if you've not already guessed it, this is a place which is some of you might be familiar with, and where rains can play a part of everyday life. It's one of those things. And we're going to meet a creature here with a very, very curious habit, something that, and a habit that depends on really seasonal pools of water. So meet the rough-skinned newt. Some of you probably already seen it. This inhabits the Pacific Northwest, and it has a very, very curious habit, the one which I'm going to talk about, where the entire breeding cycle, again, is dependent on the availability of water. Now, some of them inhabit perennial streams, but a lot of their breeding behavior actually happens in seasonal pools. And what happens is this: you have the females that go out, that seek out, and most of them are sort of aquatic in the life cycle. So they will seek out the seasonal pools in which the females will go first in small number, which will then sort of trigger off a response in males, which then arrive in a much larger numbers. The males begin to arrive, they will seek out the females, and then what happens next is this really complex set of maneuvers by which a suitable male will approach a female, and reptiles and amphibians, well, sorry, not reptiles, amphibians, especially newts, frogs, all of them have this is a term what we call amplexus, in which they will really embrace a female as part of the courtship. And this is sort of one part, the initial stage of the courtship, where they'll embrace this female, sometimes multiple males to one female, and what they will do is they'll gently nudge their lower jaw on the upper mandible of the female, kind of stimulating her to release her eggs. And if the female agrees, she will give a signal. The male will then detach, and then she will lay her eggs. The male will fertilize the eggs, and then the male will then again attach itself to the female, sort of in a way of guarding the fertilized egg, which is now in her cloaca as well before she lays them, guard it for a while before she lays her egg. Now, often this does not happen on one male to one female. People have seen big writhing masses, ball-like masses in these pools. Some of you have probably seen it yourself, where there are several males sometimes compete for a female. And you have these huge balls of many males trying to latch on, because there's really only one thing on the mind. It's purely driven by the instinct to procreate. You have multiple males coming, and in this amplexus, sometimes the females get subdued and almost suffocated in the whole process. Now, as humans, we might have a different term for this entire kind of sexual encounter that happens, but sometimes it can result in the females not making it, but most often it does. But this is such an elaborate process that I just wanted to sort of share with you. And if you were here thinking, wow, that's weird, why does that even happen? Wait till you see our next sort of candidate on the list. And on this, I'm moving back a world away from where you are to a world just as wet, if not probably one of the wettest places on the planet, to meet these guys, the purple frog of the Western Ghats in India. Meet the purple frog. It was first discovered only in 2003. Very, very recent to science, as it's a species that remains underground for most parts of the year, except for 2 or 3 weeks during the monsoon, during this time when it comes out to mate. So it is a burrowing frog. It's a fossorial animal that lives, between the leaf litter under the substrate. So the males, as you see, are much smaller than the female. That's the one riding piggyback. That's not a young one. That's a fully grown male. The males come out. They will call to a female, and that's how these frogs were actually found, by the call, which sometimes lasts only for a couple of days during the rainy season. They will call out, which will result in the females responding. And when they agree, they will again get into amplexus, move back into a tunnel or into a burrow, where they will start mating. Now, that's not the end of the ritual. It gets far more elaborate than that. The female then proceeds, once the male is accepted and she has agreed, the female then proceeds to walk to a seasonal stream of water. And this is very, very critical, because this is only done at the height of the rains, where most of these seasonal streams have reached that peak water level. So the mating period happens in the peak of the rain, so she can get right at the top of the water line to lay her eggs. And usually these are in fast flowing streams, torrential streams, which offers that much more protection for the eggs, and they will find this crevasse. So anyway, so back to this little process that's happening. So the male rides on the female's back, and often they will have to walk distances over rocks, over sometimes crossing roads, crossing through all that leaf litter with the male on a back, where they find the perfect spot for her to lay her eggs, and then the male, of course, will fertilize the eggs, and then she will build the nest together. I mean, talk about carrying the relationship on your back. I mean, this is like taking it to a new level. And then after this whole process is over, they both go their separate ways. I mean, the purple frog has been one of the rarest, I mean, it's been acknowledged as one of the rarest discoveries this century. And because they only emerge for a couple of weeks really during the year, which again brings me to how I would like to conclude, is that, you know, often these animals go through great lengths, and we've seen how, you know, life cycles are determined by weather patterns or by the onset of rains, which then brings us to the fact that, you know, weather is such an important determining factor on the lives of so many. It's not just as humans and our traditional lifestyles of, you know, whether it's what crops we grow, what season we grow, and when do we go out, when do we take our vacations. But apart from that, there's so much else that's happening in the natural world, and often species who are at the mercy of a very, very particular weather pattern that kind of triggers off a very, very specific behavior. And that brings us to the larger conversation on what is changing, how does our impact affect you know, sort of things on a global level, how are weather patterns, and we know, and we have observed this during our times, we've seen weather patterns change, we've seen exceptionally wet years, we've seen exceptionally dry years. What happens to all of these species during that time? And that's a question I'm going to leave you with to ponder for a bit. I'll close my presentation here. I hope you enjoyed listening to some of these animals. I know, especially like some of them on the screens are not the cutest of the lot, but again, there's such a very interesting behavior and something very specific, and some of them are so vulnerable to our actions or change that are permitted by our actions. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Kendall, I'd like to turn it over to you, and to you folks, if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them the best of my capacity. Over to you, Kendall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Conan. That was so interesting. And you would describe this season as magical, and it certainly is. It's like a whole different world, really. We do have time for questions, and we've got a few coming in. So just want to remind everyone that if you do have a question for Conan, you can submit that in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, the first question that came in pretty quickly was if you could describe differences between monsoon, hurricane, and just a general storm. You did a wonderful job of explaining monsoons, but I think there's some interest in learning what the differences are.
Okay, so for us, so in this part of the world, we don't have hurricanes. We call them cyclones instead. And cyclones are basically, I mean, it is an integral part of the monsoon. It is part, India, southern part of India and Sri Lanka usually in a year will get about 3 or 4 cyclones. So, you know, much like how you would have on the south eastern coast of the United States, where you call them hurricanes. I think the split, I'm not sure whether it's a vertical split or a horizontal split, but in some parts of the world we call them cyclones, and in some part of the world we call them hurricanes. This is something I'm going to have to look up now when we go. But essentially what it is a weather system that is formed in the ocean. It is a storm that's formed again due to immense low pressure, and we've got a stratospheric effect that happens with the jet stream on top. And what it causes is, you know, with the rising temperatures and the rising pressure, it forms this sort of area of extreme low pressure in the center, which is, you know, the eye of the storm, as we call it. And then we have these swirling winds that form around it that again are you know, high velocity winds that form around it. And often they will make landfall. So due to the movement of the convergence of the trade winds, as we spoke, and the rotation, they will follow these patterns and they will make landfall. So in this part of the world, most of our cyclones similar to your part of the world also hit the southeast coast, and cities like Chennai or Visakhapatnam, city or Batikola, Batikola, Trincomalee in Sri Lanka. These are cities where you'll often hear in the news as where the cyclone kind of makes landfall. But essentially, a cyclone and the hurricane are the same, and for us, it is again seasonal. We do get some cyclones during this summer monsoon, but most of our cyclones are actually during the winter monsoon when it shifts, when the wind shifts, as the axis tilts, when you have that high pressure of the land mass going into the low, that causes the swirl, and that causes our cyclones in this part of the world.
All right, and on that note, if someone were to travel to India during monsoon season, how much rain could they expect on average?
Okay, so it varies from place to place, it varies from time to time. It is a wonderful time to travel, depending on the place. And I would say a lot of, okay, I can't give you a generic answer, can be very honest. But however, with some planning, you can kind of either chase the monsoon or just be before it. Because see, it varies, right? Most of the time we have a cloudy morning which builds up into thunder showers later in the evening, so which means you get a morning, and as a travel planner I can say this, that gives you a morning of activities to do, and evening if you just want to sit back and enjoy the rain. However, there are breaks during the monsoon. We've had probably a week's break right now between the end of July to August, and as I started the webinar, it was raining, and now it seems to have stopped. So you have these little breaks, and of course, this changes from year to year. But I think it's safe to say between sort of the end of July to about mid-August is a time to travel. Of course, I'm saying that with the caveat that we cannot do a lot of wildlife stuff, but there's still some really nice spaces to explore. If you like to go culturally, there's also some walking trails in some places. If you're okay with leeches and that wetness, there are some lovely places to explore. The national park stays shut during this point of time, but the rest of the country is obviously open. People get on with their lives, and we go. The other nice corridor is just at the end of the monsoon, so end of September to beginning October, where you'll see the beautiful effects of the monsoon, where everything is lush and green and the rivers are flowing, there's waterfalls, there's the weather is still bearable and not muggy, gets a little cooler, and that's also another nice time to kind of explore during the rain.
And real quick, related to that, someone's wondering if NatHab trips occur during monsoon season.
Well, we don't have any of our group departures that happens as you can imagine. It's a little, it's not everyone's cup of tea. But as an individual, you can reach out to your adventure specialist if there's something specific, if there's a specific species you're after. If you're someone who likes reptiles and amphibians, that's the best time to get out and see them. If you like just want to enjoy the rains, it's also a great time. But I would say reach out to your adventure specialist. We can get in touch with them. I mean, we will correspond with them and sort of suggest the best places to go to and the best times to visit as well, if you're looking to travel as an individual.
So here's a question about weather patterns. Are the extreme weather patterns always moving clockwise?
It changes. It changes from year to year. Of course, a lot of this is also affected by the El Nino and El Nina that happens it can happen anywhere between 2 to 8 years. But we see the weather change. El Nina brings in a very, very wet season for us. El Nino brings in a very, very dry season for us. So even during the peak of El Nino's influence, we hardly even get a monsoon. Even during peak times like this, it's hardly there. But during El Nina, there's a lot of rain, sometimes just insane amount of rains. So, but in the general cycle of things, we see like the progression of the monsoon, like I said, starts off in the southwest, goes up to the northeastern part, hits the Himalayas, comes back down along the east coast. So it kind of goes in that little wave-like pattern, kind of yeah, you could say clockwise in a way, but it is subject to change depending on certain factors.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple questions about that purple frog that you were showing us at the end. And first one, I know the male and female are quite different in size, but can you talk a little bit more about how large they can get?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm just going to put that picture back because it is truly, I mean, it is such a strange looking creature, and we really don't know much about their behavior because they can only be observed for a couple of weeks during the year. But yeah, okay, so let's start off with some of the morphological features. Now they have this really pointed snout, which is believed it helps with the burrowing process. A lot of burrowing frogs have a pointed snout, but they also primarily feed on larvae of a lot of insects. So they don't really need a wide gape like some of the frogs to have, who feed voraciously. But again, we don't know a lot. But as with a lot of amphibians, as with a lot of frogs, the females tend to be much, much larger because they need to, because of the breeding that takes place. They have to produce the eggs, they have to lay the eggs, and they have to. So the females tend to be a lot larger than the males. And apart from this, like I said, it was very, very recently discovered. Very few of us have actually seen it. I myself have not seen it. I have only heard it, and after I think 2 sleepless nights of constantly looking for it and trying to zoom in on the calls, I still couldn't find it. So it is still very new. Actually, a lot of them, unfortunately, much of what we know, a lot of scientists actually find them as roadkill sometimes during the monsoons because like I said, they have to get to a particular stream, which sometimes bring them across a path or a road, which they unfortunately get run over sometimes. So that's how we know some of the morphological characters, because you're able to study the specimen. But really, apart from that, there isn't anything we know. And yeah, it is just such a fascinating creature. I'd like to see one myself one day.
I hope you do. You answered the last question with that explanation, so thank you very much for that. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Conan. I'm going to end the Q&A there. I loved hearing about that purple frog because I love, hearing about new discoveries. For as much as we know about this world, there's still some mystery out there. So appreciate that little tidbit. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Conan, for closing comments.
Yeah. All right. I just want to end by saying thank you to all of you for joining us. I mean, it gives us great pleasure as ELs. If you've been out with one, we love to talk, and it gives us great pleasure to sort of share our knowledge with you. And I think the more you know, or the more we learn about things, the more we understand our position and in the greater scheme of things. And just while we spoke about the rain a lot here, I think it's also just to put into context, little changes in the weather, some of it which is sort of permitted by our actions, can affect a whole bunch of things outside of ourselves. And I think as sort of stewards on this land, it is kind of our responsibility to look out for the creatures, look out for the ugly ones, look out for the ones that we hardly know anything about, and just sort of put that in perspective of what our actions can do and what we can kind of do to mitigate harsh changes and sort of ensure a longevity to all. And I think these webinars are a great tool to kind of associate with people, to meet, to listen, to understand, and to learn. And we're happy sharing them. So thank you all for joining this webinar. We'll see you again soon sometime. Thanks, Kendall, again, and I'll catch you around the block soon. All right, have a great week, everyone.
Thank you so much, Conan, and my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out the rest of this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathap.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Good night, Conan.
Good night. Bye-bye.